Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Matt, and this is Jen, our Chief Connection Officer in our office here. We are Pinnacle Chiropractic, and we're joining you guys tonight to share what we call our Perfect Storm workshop, but in a webinar format. So Jen and I, we've presented this many, many times in person with a lot of live people in the audience. This is our first time bringing this to you guys in this specific webinar format because of the COVID times that are going on right now. So we're really going to make this geared towards back to school because we're approaching a school time where it's going to be the most stressful time that our children have ever had to face when it comes to school. There are so many unknowns coming up with the school system. Some of you might have chosen to have your children in school full time. Some of you might have chosen to do half of the time. And then some of you might have chosen to do homeschooling or e-learning from a homeschool standpoint. So there's so many uncertainties that are involved in this upcoming school year, and that's going to create a lot of stress for our children. And so when we talk about the perfect storm, our anxiety, ADHD, sensory focused workshop, stress is the major topic. And when we see these kids encounter more stress, they're going to encounter more symptoms. They're going to have more emotional explosions. They're going to have less focus. They're going to have more of that anxiety. And so we're going to talk about tonight really how our care can help these kids, and specifically your kids, function better in this most stressful school year that they probably will have throughout their lifetime. So with that being said, we're going to get started. And really, when we talk about the plan for tonight, it really has to do with giving you guys hope, giving you guys answers, and then giving you guys action steps and help, and action steps that you can take to helping your children. So knowledge is really power when it comes to making educated decisions for your children. So the next slide really is our why. This has grown a lot since Jen joined me a few years ago. And so her daughter there is the top left picture there. She's a little bit older than that picture. I actually need a new freshened up picture of Avery. But all of these kids on here are why we do what we do. It's really because of the amazing changes that we can see with the children under our care and increasing their quality of life. And so Jen, her daughter Avery was a patient of mine of the offices before Jen came on board and joined our team as our Chief Connection Officer. So I invited her on here tonight in this webinar format. Usually, like I said, we do this in person and live, and she shares her story. But I invited her on here tonight to join us to share her story about Avery and her journey and what led her to our office and the results and everything she's seen with our office, and then Jen being able to see all the changes in a lot of the children's lives in our office as well. So I'll hand it over to you, Jen, and you can share some of your story.
Okay, thank you. I love seeing all of those pictures that are up there and knowing that it's just not my kiddo who has had these amazing results with our care, but there's so many other families and lives that have been touched by what we do in our office. So I'm going to rewind a little bit. I found Dr. Matt at Pinnacle Chiropractic originally as a patient first for my middle daughter, Avery, who is up there on the screen in the top left picture in the little black dress. And she was 6.5. And leading up to those years, she had quite a difficult path to get there. I was a extremely high stress pregnancy, had preterm labor, and then she ended up being frank breech and was delivered by C-section at 39 weeks. Immediately upon being born, she had severe projectile vomiting, like nothing I had ever seen from any child before, much worse than just reflux would be. Had a really difficult time gaining weight and keeping anything in her. Really struggled through diet changes for myself, and then ultimately landing on a premix formula that she did better with, and still had like a gagging reflux with it, and had pooped a lot. She pooped a minimum of 10 times a day the first 3 years of her life. She was seeing GI specialists and all children's and the pediatrician, and we were looking for answers and trying to figure out what was going on, because mixed in with the GI stuff, she also had a lot of behavioral and emotional and developmental stuff that was mixed in. And I was really convinced that if we could figure out what was going on with her GI system, everything else would kind of fall in place for her. By the time she was 3, she was less than 25 pounds. She was speaking less than 25 words, and we weren't getting any answers, and she wasn't getting any better. A friend of ours was moving, and a friend of theirs was there helping them, and it was a gentleman who was attending the College of East West Medicine, and he spent some time around her that day. He heard a little bit about her story, and he suggested to us that we go gluten-free. And I would have done really anything anyone told me at that point, because we were so concerned about where she was at. And we went gluten-free, and within 2 weeks, we saw a difference digestively with Ailey. And within 4 weeks, she was speaking 5-word sentences, and it was like something was just unlocked inside of her brain. And we were blown away by just eliminating this one item out of her diet, what could happen. And I really had something turned on for my brain as well that clicked in place, and I felt like we could really heal my baby. We could find some answers, and if like this one food could do this, what else am I missing? And we went from we kind of connected with some families online that had similar journeys and struggles, and we went from gluten-free to dairy-free to organic, and low toxins in the home, essential oils. We got tested with a functional doctor, and she had some severe nutritional deficiencies, and we were able to start supplementing with those. And each of these changes that we saw, she made some gains. We were really amazed with the things that could happen with eliminating these diet things, and then also supplementing. She gained 8 pounds the first year that we had changed her diet, and she was able to actually keep it on. But we got to the age of 4, and the emotional dysregulation didn't fall away. And some of the stuff had really gotten worse, and she had an inability to get along with her own peers. She was developmentally delayed still. She would have meltdowns that were more extreme than I'd ever seen from any child. And she would kind of reach an edge, and she would go over that edge, and I couldn't get her back. And I have an older daughter, and I have a younger daughter. And I kind of thought that I had the parenting thing where I had some good tools in my toolbox and could figure some things out. Nothing worked that I knew to do, and none of my tools worked with her. We ended up at the Florida Center for an evaluation at 4, and they diagnosed her with sensory processing disorder. And we started occupational therapy and behavior therapy. During that time, she also saw some gains in those areas. There was little things. I mean, she'd never been able to be away from me at that point for any length of time. And I was told by her first occupational therapist that she was in fight or flight those first 4 years of her life. And so we started occupational therapy. We started to see some gains. And she was attending a special needs preschool there. And she was able to transition to a typical developing preschool setting, and then on to kindergarten at Fruitville. And she was in a regular traditional classroom. She did occupational therapy in the morning, every day, 5 days a week. And we also were doing private occupational therapy 2 hours a week outside of there. And in school, she was thriving. She academically was doing beautifully. Emotionally, the teachers were so pleased with where she was at. Many times the teachers would tell me if they didn't have the professional evaluations, they would not have necessarily believed me when I described some of the struggles that we had with Ave, because of how well she did in that school setting at that time. I would come through to pick her up in Carline, and they would bring her out to my car, and they would put her in. They would barely have that door closed to the car, and she would explode with emotion. And our evenings were very, very difficult. There was no first time listening. There was no getting along with her sibling. There was no routines to anything that she could follow, even though these were routines that we had done her entire life. And by bedtime, there was always at least one really severe, extreme meltdown, and our evenings were no fun. And every professional that I asked about it and trying to find out ways of helping her would just tell me the same answer, that she's really working very hard. She's very high anxiety and very stressed out at school. She's holding it together while she's there. And then when she's in her safe space, with you, she's falling apart. I understood that this was their why, but I was looking for more. I wanted to know how to best help her to navigate the world in a way where she was successful and thriving, not just working so hard to hold it together. Halfway through her kindergarten year, a friend of mine tagged me in a Facebook post, and it was a video that Dr. Matt shared. It was from Dr. Tony Ebel's office in Crystal Lake, Illinois, and it was that's who Dr. Matt is trained under. And it was a video from a mom up there. Her name is Nikki, and she was sharing her story about her son James. And I watched her story, and I very closely related to it, and I knew that I had to get Ably to this doctor. I clicked on the link and it took me to Crystal Lake, Illinois, and I wondered for a little bit how on earth that we were going to talk the hubby into it. He had really gone along with everything that I had suggested thus far, but this was going to be a really big one. And Dr. Matt commented on that post, and he said, I'm having a workshop coming up in the office. This was going to be in January of 17. He said, you should attend. And I attended that workshop, and it was the first time in 6.5 years that I met with a professional, and they laid out information to me that I had never heard before, but that explained how that Ably had ended up where she had, why she was in fight or flight for those years of her life, and the most important part was what to do about it. And I was very excited to commit to care. And we started Ably, and Dr. Matt had met with my husband and I, and we committed to care. And we knew that it was going to be a little bit different style of chiropractic than some traditional chiropractic, and that, he doesn't do neck pain, back pain, car accident type of stuff. And we were looking for something very specific for pediatric and gentle. And she started care, and Rob and I kind of really wondered after the first adjustment how it was going to possibly make a difference in the struggles that Ably had, because it just didn't seem like it was very much. And we walked out of the office after the first adjustment, and we saw behaviors from Ably that we had never seen from her in 6.5 years. And we had kind of a 4-day honeymoon period. After that we just kept seeing win after win, one thing after another, that we were amazed at her capabilities. And we went through a detox period, which our doctors share with patients when they start with our care. We talk about that. And after a couple weeks of that, we came out of that, and she just had one win after another. We were in awe, Rob and I have an older daughter who was 16 at the time, and we would catch her, and she would do something or react to something that we were very conditioned to her having an adverse or negative reaction to, and she would not have those reactions. And by the 4-month mark, we just were absolutely blown away. We knew she was going to be happy in all areas of her life and successful, and her anxiety was less, and her ability to navigate the world around her came from a completely different space. So I got to join Dr. Matt and his team at Pinnacle later that year as a part of the staff, and I get to help other families and walk them through this journey. And I feel so blessed and so grateful to be here. And thank you very much for letting me share Ably's story again.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a powerful story, and I've heard it so many times, but each time it's so powerful. And I hope that connected with any of you moms out there, or even dads out there that may be watching this, that you can relate to some of those day-to-day struggles and get the message that there is hope out there, that we are able and we can help your child function better on a day-to-day basis. So thank you so much, Jen, for joining us tonight. I'm going to allow you to leave and spend time with your family tonight. So everybody say bye to Jen, and I will finish the rest. Thanks, Jen. All right. So, like I said, hopefully everybody really enjoyed that and was able to connect to pieces of that story. So now what we're really going to do is we're going to dive into a lot of the science behind our care and really how we're able to help a lot of these children in our office. And so we're really going to start with the hidden causes to these chronic childhood conditions like sensory processing disorder, like anxiety, like autism, ADHD. Really, the list goes on and on and on. You could even lump chronic immune challenges, chronic ear, nose, throat things in there. And so when we talk about these challenges, at its core, what it really boils down to is stress. So we know that stress affects our body. We know when as adults, when we get super stressed out, we get more tense. We might have neck pain or back pain. or we might have headaches. We can feel stress as adults. Well, guess what? Kids can feel stress as well. It just presents a little bit differently. And so when we're really going to drive home this message tonight, what this boils down to is the more stress that these kids encounter early on in their lives, when their brain, their nervous system is developing the most rapidly, within those first couple years of life and within the womb during pregnancy, the more stress they encounter during that time, what it does is it keeps that stress mode of our brain, of our nervous system stuck on. And so every case is going to be a little bit different of the different types of stress that they encounter. And it could be being adopted, it could be birth intervention, it could be stress during pregnancy. We'll talk about some of these. We'll talk about the most common ones that we see in our office. But what it really boils down to, like I said, is the more stress that they encounter and the more physical stress, chemical stress, emotional stress they encounter, the more that nervous system, the brain, gets stuck into that stress mode. So what is this perfect storm? So this was really developed by my mentor, Dr. Tony Ebel. I'll look so you can see me while I'm talking about this, because we're going to really drive this home, because this is what we see in many, many case histories, or a lot of these ingredients. So when we really listen to moms and listen about their pregnancy, we listen about their labor delivery process, we listen about how the child was as a baby, as an infant, a lot of the times there are these early warning signs there. There are these common stressors, there are these common warning signs that nervous system's in more of a fight or flight state. It's in more of a stress mode. As we'll talk about a little bit later on, a little bit more about that science behind that stress mode. That's what really turns that stress mode to being stuck in that stress mode. So when we really look at what we see very, very commonly, not every case that we see is going to have all of these ingredients, but the more that we can see in the case history, the more it's an indicator that that stress was stuck on very early on. The more of those, the more in that stress mode the child likely is to be as well. So not every kid that has these ingredients or has these challenges is going to grow into sensory stuff, is going to grow into anxiety, is going to grow into ADHD, autism, those type of things. But what we do know is the kids that we do see with anxiety, with ADHD, with sensory struggles, with autism, the majority of them, 90% plus, have had one or more of these stressors and early warning signs in their case histories. So the first one is really going all the way back to pre-pregnancy and pregnancy. So could be fertility challenges where mom had a lot of issues getting pregnant. Ironically enough, a lot of fertility challenges are due to mom's nervous system being in more of a stressed out state, that it's not prepared to get pregnant and not prepared to have a viable pregnancy because mom's nervous system's in more of that stressed out state. So that's one of the first ingredients that we see. It could be fertility challenges, but it also could be a very high stress pregnancy. If we think about that baby developing within mom's womb, it's developing and sharing blood supply basically from mom to baby. And when mom's stress hormones are elevated, those stress hormones are going to be shared with that developing baby. And the first thing that starts to grow and develop on a baby within the womb is that brain, is that nervous system, because it is the master control system of the body. And so that fertility challenges and stress during pregnancy is often the first ingredient that we see happen in a lot of the cases that we take care of. And that stress during the pregnancy can present itself in many different ways. It could be just a very stressful time in mom's life while she's pregnant. We see a lot of moms that went through a big move, moving states, or a high stress event like that. Could be a lot of work stress where mom was under a ton of stress at work. It could be a relational stress where mom was having issues with the father of the baby. And so a lot of those stressors are what really elevate mom's stress hormones and share them with the baby, developing that nervous system, or starting to develop that nervous system into more of that stressed out mode. So that's really kind of the first area where we see a lot of this stress start. The second is going to be in the labor and delivery process. So we see a lot of babies that were born via birth interventions. They weren't a calm, natural vaginal delivery. They had maybe a cord wrapped around the neck. It could be a C-section delivery. It could be a forceps delivery, a vacuum extraction, or it could be just a really long, hard labor. Maybe mom was induced and things just weren't progressing and they kept on giving more Pitocin, or it eventually led to a C-section or an emergency C-section. Just a stressful birth event, essentially. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, because that is really a key ingredient, especially when it comes to chiropractic care, that birth intervention piece. So stress during that labor delivery process is that second period where we start to see that stress wire baby's nervous system into a more stress turned on or stress stuck on state. And then after that, this is where we really see the perfect storm happen. This is where we see babies present with certain symptoms, then toddlers present with certain symptoms, then when they reach that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age, present with certain symptoms. And then what we even know now is that the older the kid develops in that stress mode, the more challenges. The challenges just change and morph. A lot of the times going off to pediatricians, they'll tell moms, just don't worry, they'll grow out of some of these things that we're going to talk about. And what we know is they might grow out of some of those things, but what happens if it's really due to stress on the nervous system and being stuck in that stress mode, they grow into more challenges as they grow and develop. And so the first one, that first warning sign, is really those newborn and infants that are really stressed out babies. They're colicky, they're fussy, they might have a lot of spit up and reflux or projectile vomiting. They're not sleeping very well, they don't nurse very well. Could be a misshapen head where they have a flat spot on the head, or on one side where one side of the spine or one side of the neck starts to develop tighter than the other side. That stress in those early warning signs can present as very different things in different cases, but those are some of the examples of stressed out babies. Especially the telltale sign is really the colic and the reflux, the severe fussiness, the inability to fall asleep and kind of self-soothe. Those are definitely indicators that that nervous system of that baby are a little bit more in that stress mode. The second really thing is those stressed colicky babies really might grow out of colic and reflux, but they grow into other challenges. A lot of the times at the toddler age, they're growing into sick, stressed out toddlers, so still not sleeping very well. They're getting sick one after another, maybe ear infections one after another, where it results in tubes. Could be a lot of ear, nose, throat stuff, so throat stuff, swollen tonsils, swollen adenoids, allergies, those type of things. Or it could be chronic respiratory things as well. Just where that immune system is overwhelmed. They're going off to daycare for the first time. They're getting exposed to a lot of things. Most kids that have a good functioning nervous system, when they get exposed to those things, their body is going to be able to fight those things off. They might get sick every once in a while. No kid's going to completely never get sick. But we're talking about those kids that seem to catch everything. They're constantly sick. It's one thing after another. Fever, it could be RSV, all of those things keep on showing up as chronic immune challenges, is what we see a lot of the times in that toddler age range. And so once again, pediatricians will say, okay, they'll grow out of it, or we'll put tubes in, we'll take the adenoids out, we'll take the tonsils out, which those all can help with those specific things. But once again, if it's really due to that nervous system being in that stressed out state, the next set of challenges are just going to show up down the line. And that's where we really see around age 3, 4, 5 and up, when a lot of those sensory spectrum ADHD challenges really start to show up. This is where we see the extreme hyperactivity, inability to sit still or focus on things, the sensitivity to loud noises, the anxiety and fears start to show up. All of those things really start to show up around that age of 3, 4, 5 is what we see in a lot of kids that we take care of. And then what we know now, even more so, of taking care of a wide range of different kids, is those sensory spectrum children, they grow into, as long as that nervous system stays stuck in that stress mode, they become those more exhausted, angry, anxious, depressed teenagers. That nervous system, I always like to describe it as their nervous system is basically running this marathon at a full-out sprint out of the gate. They're on the gas pedal right away from birth, showing some of those early warning signs. Eventually, that nervous system reaches this exhausted stage. This is where we see a lot of our preteen, our tween, and our teenagers hit an exhaustion point where their nervous system is basically like, we cannot keep this pace up any longer. We are exhausted. And so they could be a lot of anger issues, anxiousness, a lot of anxiety and fears, and then depression, just becoming isolated from their peers, not wanting to go out and do anything, not having that energy to do anything. And then those teenagers, oftentimes, they, once again, if they're stuck in that stress mode, they become burnout, stressed out, exhausted adults. And this can happen even as adults. As adults, we are constantly doing so much for our families. We're doing so much for work. We live in a culture that is very, very busy and puts a lot of stress load on us. And so as adults, if we're in that stress mode too much, we become burnout, stressed out, exhausted adults. And a lot of the times adults will start to show up as having migraines or headaches or adrenal fatigue. Those type of things show up as in the adulthood. So once again, this all boils down to stress. And the more of that stress we encounter, the more of that stress our kids encounter, it sticks our nervous system into a stress mode. And so that's what we're really going to dive into next, is we're going to start talking about the nervous system, some of the science. So I love this quote. It's by Dr. Bruce Lipton. He says this about the nervous system: the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. And so when we really look at a lot of anxiety, sensory, ADHD, autism challenges, it's all a nervous system issue. They're not able to perceive their environment through the nervous system, and then that affects the ability for that nervous system to control and coordinate the behavior of all cells of the body. And so once again, this is all about stress being stuck on in our brain, in our nervous system. And so one of the cool things about our office, because we work with the brain and the nervous system, sorry about that, let me make sure this gets pulled back up. Bear with us as we're trying to work out all the kinks of learning a new program and presenting this from a webinar format. But essentially, when that master control system, that brain, that nervous system, is altered from its proper function, because it controls everything, we can see a wide range of different things affected. So this could be our motor control. We'll see kids that maybe have poor balance, poor coordination, poor fine motor skills, bad handwriting. We can see kids that have gut GI issues, constipation, reflux, IBS, sensitivity to foods. We can see the immune system altered as well. The kids that get chronic sickness all the time, that have a lot of that ear, nose, throat, allergies, asthma, those type of things. We can see the speech system altered as well. So kids that are speech delayed, that aren't able to articulate their speech properly at a certain age. We can see the social interaction, the social aspect, where maybe your child has no perception of their space around themselves, and they get up in other kids' areas in space, and that stresses that children out. It could be behavioral and emotional things. So we see a lot of kids that have behavioral emotional dysregulation challenges, where they're just having an explosion of emotions. It could be at home, it could be at school, it could be at both of those environments, where they're just having an explosion of emotions and they don't know how to handle the stress. The only way they know how to react is through letting it out or trying to let it out. And a lot of the times that's an explosion of emotions affecting things behaviorally. And so the next part of this workshop, we're really going to dive into the science behind our care and chiropractic care and how we can help children. So we're going to go over 5 D words, and we're going to break each one of them down individually and talk about how each D word builds on the last one and affects the nervous system. This is really how the spine affects the brain, and it then affects the nervous system, and then it affects the controlled output from that nervous system. So the first thing that we're going to talk about, the first D word, the first chain of reaction that really happens with the spine and the nervous system, it's called dyskinesia. It's basically when the spine becomes misaligned and fixated. So that spine loses its proper position, it becomes kinked, jammed, stuck. So that spine becoming kinked, jammed, stuck, misaligned, and fixated, that's when we really start to see neurological implications follow afterwards. But essentially, where we see this start many, many times over is really at birth. We see birth intervention as one of the very, very common ingredients that we see in a lot of the kids that have anxiety, sensory struggles. Not everyone is going to have birth intervention. There could be vaginal deliveries, but there could be other stressors involved there. But we see a lot of kids that were born via C-section with the cord wrapped, with forceps delivery, vacuum extractions, and typically our more severe cases, 9.5 times out of 10 are going to show birth intervention as one of the culprits, one of the stressors. So this is what a normal C-section delivery looks like for those of you that haven't seen one. They're basically yanking baby out by the head and neck and with mom's womb resisting. So there's about 80, 90 pounds of force on that upper head and neck area of these babies, of these newborn babies. And so whenever we go over this workshop, what's the first thing that you protect on a newborn baby? It's that head and neck area. Why? Because they don't have the developed musculature to protect that area yet. They can't hold their heads up yet. And so when we have a big amount of force there, it can create that misalignment and fixation of the spine right at birth. And so when we get to some of these further chain of reaction, some of the other D words, you'll see how that misalignment and fixation of the spine really starts to affect the brain and starts to affect the nervous system. So this was a study done by a group of osteopaths. What they basically did was they examined 100 newborns at birth. These are healthy newborns with good APGAR scores. They didn't have to go to the NICU. They examined 100 newborns at birth for some level of misalignment and fixation of the spine. And these are all different types of births. So some were C-section, some forceps, some vacuum, some natural vaginal deliveries. What they found was 99 out of 100 of those babies had some level of misalignment and fixation of the spine. So just a normal vaginal delivery can be very physically stressful on the spine and body of not only baby, but also mom as well. But the big kicker to this study was they found the greater the severity of that misalignment and fixation of the spine, the more birth intervention that was used in that labor and delivery process. So the C-section delivery, the forceps delivery, the vacuum extractions created a larger and more severe misalignment and fixation of the spine. And when we really talk about neurological implications and affecting that brain, affecting that nervous system, the greater the severity of that misalignment and fixation of the spine, the greater the neurological impact that occurs afterwards. So the next D word that we're going to talk about is called disapprhentation. So that dyskinesia, that misalignment fixation of the spine, leads to what is called disapprhentation. And when we're talking about disapprhentation, it means abnormal input. And when we're talking about input here, we're talking about input to the brain. So we have within our spine, and really all joints of our body, but our spine are 24 different joints stacked on top of each other. We have within those joints of our body what are called proprioceptors and nociceptors. So proprioceptors, it's basically when everything's moving properly, when everything's aligned properly. That proprioceptive feedback or input to the brain is like brain food. It's calming and nice, relaxing input to the brain. The brain likes to know everything's moving properly, likes to know everything's aligned properly. But when we have that big misalignment and fixation of the spine, what it does is it alters that proprioceptive input to the brain. It basically suppresses it or dampens it or shuts it down. It cuts off that good input and replaces it with what's called nociception. Nociception is essentially noisy input to the brain. It's stressful input to the brain. The brain doesn't like nociception. It's confusing. It's very stressful. It's like this background noise. I like to describe nociception as if we were to all be in a small room. Obviously, during COVID times, we can't do that social distancing thing right now, of course, but if we were to be in a small room together, I was to bring like a big speaker and blast some heavy metal rap music, really kind of very stimulating music, and I gave us some math problems to do, a short story to read, we would all have a really difficult time focusing and trying to concentrate on those math problems, on the reading the story and the questions afterwards about the story. And essentially, that's what happens when we have that big misalignment and fixation of the spine. We have all of this nociception, or this background noise going on, and all this nociceptive background feedback to our brain. We no longer have that good calming input, and it gets replaced with that noisy, stressful input. So like I said, we talked about proprioception, why it's so important. It's basically what stimulates the brain, and it's a vital nutrient for that brain. And the majority of that proprioception, this is one thing I don't want to leave out because I want to make sure that I include that. The majority of that proprioception comes from the spine, and specifically comes from the upper neck area. And so when we have that big misalignment fixation of the spine from a C-section, from a forceps, from a vacuum extraction, from a cord wrapped around the neck, we have a lot of force in this upper neck area. What we're doing is we're essentially cutting off 1/3 of that good proprioceptive calming input to the brain, replacing it with that nociception, with that noisy input to the brain. So that's why our spine plays such a pivotal role in the input to the brain. And then, as we're going to talk about on these next few slides, how that input to the brain really starts to affect the overall function of the nervous system. So that dyskinesia, that misalignment, fixation of the spine leads to what is called dysautonomia, or leads to disorientation, that altered input to the brain, which then leads to dysautonomia. So dysautonomia is basically dysfunction with the autonomic nervous system. Our autonomic nervous system, I'll go to this next slide here so you can see, if you look in the middle there, you'll see the brake pedal in green and the gas pedal in red. Our autonomic nervous system consists of two different modes to it. On the left-hand side there, we have the parasympathetic mode. That we refer to as the brake pedal because that's where really all the good stuff happens. It's where the rest, relaxation, growth, immune function, development, all the good stuff happens when we're in more of a parasympathetic mode of that autonomic nervous system. The opposite mode is the sympathetic mode, and that we refer to as the gas pedal because that is our stress mode. It's our fight or flight mode. And so when we have that big misalignment fixation of the spine leading to altered input to the brain, what it does is it sticks that autonomic nervous system into more of that sympathetic gas pedal mode, or that stress mode. This is where stress gets stuck on. The autonomic nervous system is what our brain communicates to our body through, and our body communicates back to the brain. And so when we're altering that mode and sticking it in that stress mode, the communications to the brain, to the body, and from the body back to the brain are altered. And that's where that chain of reaction of the things on the bottom there, you'll see as all these symptoms start to show up, because that nervous system stuck into that stress mode, into that sympathetic mode, into that fight or flight, into that gas pedal mode more often than it should be. And then being stuck into that sympathetic fight or flight mode over time, it really leads to the fourth D, which is called Dispinesis. That is basically abnormal energy output. And so that's basically the kids that we can see that are going a million miles a minute. They can't sit still for anything. They can't pay attention. They can't focus. Their brain is literally moving a million miles a minute is the way we describe dyskinesia. They're getting all of this input to their brain. And one of the cool things about our office is we actually have scanning technology, non-invasive technology to measure this. So if you look at the bottom there, you'll see a picture of a few different graphs. So essentially, we can run a few different scans on the brain, on the nervous system, on the kids that we take care of. The first one measures overall inflammation along the spine. This tells us exactly where the problem areas are at within that spine, within that spinal cord, and the nervous system. And then the second scan that we do really measures this dyskinesia and measures the overall muscular tension along the spine. We know the more tense somebody is, the more stressed they are. Tension is basically stress stored in the body and stored specifically within the spine. And so a lot of these kids that are super stressed out and super in fight or flight, they're going to show a lot of tension throughout their body. We're going to be able to measure that. We're going to be able to see that. And then the last one that we can measure, it's called heart rate variability, and really measures the energy reserves of the body. And it tells us how long has that stress been impacting that child's brain, impacting that nervous system. When we talk about the heart rate variability, that is crucial for our older kids, our tweens, our teens, and even our adults, because it will tell us how exhausted their nervous system is. The more exhausted it is, we know the longer it's been in that fight or flight, the longer it's been stuck in that stress mode. And so the last and final D is what we refer to as disconnected. This is where the kids become super disconnected. They become depressed. They're not able to socialize. They're not able to function very well in society. They just become disconnected kids. And that's what we really want to avoid, is getting into that disconnected state, because that is often the most severe stage that we see a lot of the kids in. Those are going to be our full-blown autism cases, or very lower functioning kids are typically the very disconnected kids as well. So there's really three types of cases when we deal with sensory related cases and when we deal with nervous system cases. So we really categorize them as three different things. And so the first one is going to be our raging bulls. These are typically the ADHD kids. They're the million miles a minute, tons of hyperactivity. They could have anxiety as well mixed in there. But they're typically those kids that are like a bull in a china shop. They're always bumping into things a million miles a minute. They don't slow down for anything. They have issues falling asleep. They have issues staying asleep. They're literally on that gas pedal all the time. The second type of case is what we refer to as the drunken bulls. These are more of the very clumsy kids. They have poor coordination. They have poor core muscles. They might have been labeled as having low tone. They might have had speech and organization problems, learning disabilities. Those are our drunken bulls. And then the third type of cases, is probably the most common, is the raging drunken bull. They have certain aspects of both of those that we just talked about. They have some of the raging bull, some of the drunken bull. Some might be slightly more drunken bull than raging bull. Others might be slightly more raging bull than they are drunken bull, but they've got a little bit of both of those things. So really, the next part of this workshop is talking about some of our testimonials. So these things are things that you can read on your own as well. Maybe you're skeptical, or maybe you've been hearing a lot about our practice, but you can go to Google, you can go to our Facebook page and read a lot of our testimonials, a lot of our reviews on there from patients that have experienced a lot of awesome results. So I'll just read a couple of them tonight. So Dr. Matt and the entire staff at Pinnacle is nothing short of amazing. My son was having behavioral, sleeping, and eating issues, among others. While going through the initial treatment plan with Pinnacle, I saw my son change before my eyes. He now sleeps well, is right on target with other children his age developmentally, and is such a happy boy. Dr. Matt literally changed the trajectory of our family's life with his care. Second one, they are great at what they do. Everyone there is amazing. I take both my toddler and baby. The results you get are incredible. Overall, very happy. And the third one, we love Pinnacle, Dr. Jordan. Dr. Jordan isn't with us on this webinar tonight, but she's our other doctor. You might have saw her on some of the pictures that we showed in our Y, or on our Facebook page. You'll see a lot of pictures with her. Both of us are trained underneath our mentor, Dr. Tony, and we both have a wealth of experience working with kids. So Dr. Jordan and Dr. Matt, our kids have had chronic health issues, and we are seeing huge improvements for both of them after just a few weeks of care. My oldest has less anxiety and is sleeping better. My youngest has no sinus issues for the first time in a while. I give Pinnacle the highest recommendation possible. Thank you. And then the last one that I'll share, this one's definitely a very powerful one. Dr. Matt has changed our son's life. He has ADHD, SPD, and mild autism. Through Dr. Matt's chiropractic care, we have seen so many positive changes in our son. He is able to take less medication, has fewer meltdowns, and is learning to express himself in such an amazing new way. Homework used to be a huge struggle as well, but now it's becoming a breeze. Our son would not even begin to try foods outside of his comfort zone, but since chiropractic care, he's more interested in trying different foods. His empathy towards others has also changed drastically. He's also able to verbalize better to others what his needs are without yelling or screaming. After sessions with Dr. Matt, he tells his dad and I that he actually feels better and has more control over his body and more control over his actions. Thank you so much, Pinnacle, for helping our little man become the fantastic kid we always knew he had the potential of being. So once again, that's really why I do what I do, why Dr. Jordan does what she does, why Jen does what she does, why Claire at the front desk does what she does. It's really to hear these stories, to hear the impact and the changes in these children's lives that we're able to make through calming their brain, calming their nervous system down, just getting everything to work better. And so there's really kind of three main stages to our care. First, we want to release their stress. Sometimes this presents itself as detox. They might get more emotional in the beginning. The way I like to describe it is we've got all this stress and tension in the body. When we begin releasing it, it's got to come out. And that stress that's stored in the body is unreleased stress. And when we begin releasing it, it's got to come out because we don't want it to get internalized and reabsorbed in the body. Second release stage is restoring neurological balance, neurological function. And then the third stage, our favorite stage, of course, is that child being able to rock their full potential. So you might be a mom out there watching, once again, worried about this upcoming school year or what you can do to help your child navigate this very crazy, stressful school year. There are probably kids out there that don't have these struggles, but because of this stressful school year and all the changes that are happening, are going to start to show some of these challenges that we talked about because of that stress load. So even those kids that don't show a lot of these warning signs and don't show a lot of these challenges, they're going to have a stressful school year. One way to combat that stress is to really see if we can help your son or daughter. And so basically the action step tonight is to ask questions, ask on the Facebook page here, type in the comment section if you have any questions, message us through Facebook, and ask any questions. Reduce their stressors in any way that you can. Obviously, going back to school, that's going to be increasing their stress load. So the third and final action step is really get your child scanned. Find out if we can help them achieve and have their best school year yet, and have them be able to adapt to that stress in a much better way than what they would be without our care. So for tonight, for coming out, for watching this webinar, we want to reward those who took time out of their busy schedules, out of their nights, to educate yourselves, to learn more about our care. And so this opportunity, it's not a commitment to care. All it is finding out if we can help your son or daughter. And so what this really includes is our first two visits. The first visit, what we'll do, usually we'll do the case history and consultation over the phone at this point. Because of COVID, we're trying to decrease the amount of time people spend in our office. So that first thing will be a phone consultation, a phone case history. We'll find out more about your son or daughter's struggles. We'll find out more about the pregnancy, the labor delivery process, some of those warning signs we'll be looking for. And then the second part of that is really doing our neurological evaluation using those scans that we talked about. We'll be doing those 2 to 3 scans on your son or daughter to really find out how much dysfunction lies within their nervous system, how much inflammation, how much tension they have along their spine and within that nervous system, and what their energy reserves or energy levels are, or how exhausted their nervous system might be. So that's really kind of the first visit or first step. The second is really the second visit, where you'll come back. We'll go over in detail all of the findings from our examination, our evaluation, and we will discuss what we recommend for care for your child. Each child's going to be a little bit different depending on severity. And so most of our kids that do have anxiety sensory challenges, they're going to be coming multiple times a week for the duration of a few months before we're able to calm that nervous system down and get it stabilized. And so we'll go over all of those recommendations. We'll go over all the financials. We'll answer any question that you have at that second visit. So normally those 2 to 3 visits combined are $250 in our office. For coming out today, we're going to offer that for $100 for one child. Or we see tons of full families, stressed out moms, stressed out dads, and other children that just want to be seen for wellness purposes to prevent those stress loads from increasing. If you want to get your entire family scan, it's just $100 more or $200 total. This is time sensitive though. We're not going to extend this out to anybody that watches this a week from now, a month from now. We really want you to take action with this by the end of the weekend. So what you can do if you want to take advantage of this offer is reach out to us by phone. 941-822-8828 is how you can reach us. You can text that number or you can call that number. Please call that number by the end of the weekend. We'll give the deadline to be through Monday, essentially. So we'll give you through the weekend and to Monday evening to claim that offer. And so, like I said, reach out to us by phone or by text. Jen, who was on here earlier, she will reach out to you and get back with you and schedule those appointments for you. And so maybe you're on the fence and wondering, is this the right time to do it? I don't know what to do. Our schedule is about to get super, super crazy. This is just an opportunity to find out if we can help your child. And we really want to help your child have that best school year that they've ever had. Also, you can reach out to us via Facebook as well. Send us a message on Facebook and we'll get back to you that way. If you just email or message us on Facebook with your email address and phone number, we'll be able to contact you that way as well. So I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. We're coming up on almost an hour, so I don't want to take any more of your time. Once again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us via Facebook or 941-822-8828. We have texting capabilities from our phone number there, so you don't have to call if you just want to shoot a quick text with some questions. Jen will get back to you through text, or she can give you a call back and answer any questions that you might have. So really appreciate you guys coming out tonight. Hope your child has a great school year. I know it's going to be crazy with everything going on with COVID and all the stress that's happening right now in our world. And just know we're always here to help at any time. Please reach out to us. We love answering questions and we want you to have as many answers as you can and want you to make the best informed decision for your family and for your children on what you need to do to increase their overall health and wellness levels. So once again, guys, I'm Dr. Matt from Pinnacle Chiropractic. As always, I always end with be well, and we'll see you guys on the next